Hello, and welcome to the Who Do You Think You Are module. For the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at a case study of nations and people. Specifically, I will be outlining to you early modern and modern India. And we're going to be looking at the different identities of the people who live in the Indian subcontinent, as well as the difficult search for independence, which culminates in 1947. And I'm going to be going through the main social, economic, religious, and cultural themes that lead to independence. My name is Duncan Frankis, and I've recently moved to Newman University. In fact, my appointment is so recent that I am not up and running on all of the systems yet, and I don't yet have a Newman specific email address. So, if you want to contact me about anything in the next week, email me on d.j.frankis@beham.ac.uk and I'll get back to you. I'm the module coordinator for this, so any questions or problems you might have, get in touch with me via the email on this slide. And then when I get a Newman specific one, I will update you. So, to understand the complex politics, social issues, and economic issues that India experienced in the mid 20th century, we need to go back. We need to go way back to the classical and medieval period. What I want to do now is just give you context to India's geopolitical situation. And one of the most important factors that defines modern India is its geographic location. Now, in the classical period, the one of the most important trade routes is known as the Silk Roads. Now, there is not just one trade route along the Silk Roads, it's lots of complicated smaller ones, but generally speaking, you get enormous trade that begins in eastern China and the Southeast Asian islands and moves westwards through the sub Indian continent and Mongolia, through Persia, the Arabian Peninsula, and into Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. But there is also the sea routes of the Silk Roads, which go across the Indian Ocean to Eastern Africa. And as a result of this, there is an incredibly diverse and complex um, interaction of different merchant groups from different nations, different ethnicities, trading lots of different things. And India is bang slap in the middle of this network. And as a result, it is a logical place for many merchants to stop and trade, and in a lot of cases, end up living there. So, what you get in India and northern India, especially, is an incredibly diverse social, religious, and ethnic background. So, there's lots of different groups trying to live and gain influence there. And the Indian economy is booming by the mid medieval period. So you get an incredibly wealthy country, and that's represented in the various Buddhist monasteries that you'll see throughout India that were built between the 1st and 13th century. As you can see in the golden spires that typify Buddhist monasteries, there is a lot of money to be found in this country, and it makes it an attractive prospect for different countries and different traders. Now, between the 1st and 13th century, Buddhist groups typify India and are some of the largest religious groups. However, by the 13th century, Chinese and Mongolian expansion decimates those numbers. And by the time of the 15th and 16th century, where we really begin our study, the main groups you see in northern India are Sikhs in the northeast, as well as Hindus. Hindu is the most numerous religious group, and there is estimated to be over 50 million of them by the 16th century. But this creates an incredibly complicated political and religious situation. If you look at the image on the right of your screen, you've got a kind of general summary of the different areas that exist. And it's a lot like what Europe looked like in the medieval period, which was defined by very small feudal states. In India, they are known as Mahayana Padas, and the borders are slightly more flexible than European countries. But generally speaking, this is what it looks like. And I'm not going to go into the intricacies of it because that would take literally hours. But all you need to know is there's a um, complicated political system in northern India where lots of different religions and groups are trying to expand and fighting with each other. Now, generally speaking, in the northeast, you have Sikhs, central and southern India, you have Hindus, and in the northwest, you start to get um, Muslim groups in what is now modern day Pakistan. You also have the culturally very different Bengal region in the northeast, which is now modern day Bangladesh. So it's a very complicated national scene. And it's not just divided by religion or ethnicity. There's a social and economic structure that emerges in this complicated national um, context. Now, this is now known as the caste system. And it is basically divided up on religious, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. And really importantly, what your role is in society and how much you contribute. And the caste system, which is summarized in this picture on the right, is a really important window in telling us what Indians in this time period valued most of all. If you look at the top of the caste system, it is people who are priests, religious leaders, and teachers. So that is what defines early modern India. It's religious beliefs as well as learning. And that's so important. And we'll cover that a lot in the next few weeks. Underneath the top of the social structure, you have warriors and rulers. So the local princes are actually held in less esteem than teachers or priests. Below warriors and rulers, you have people who feed the country and stimulate the economy in farmers, traders, and merchants. Below them, laborers. And at the bottom of the caste system, you have street sweepers and latrine cleaners. And really interestingly, a lot of these come from the Bengal region, and that is a religious and cultural divide and prejudice that remains throughout this time period. So you think about the politics, the religion, and the social and economic structure, India is incredibly divided, and its divisions continue to define it throughout the time period we're looking at. Now, amongst this complex system of politics, one individual begins to expand and gain influence. And Babur is originally from the northwest in approximately what is modern day Kabul and the Khyber Valley. And Babur has a very interesting and important lineage. On his father's side, he descends from Timur the Great, who you might have possibly heard of. And then on his mother's side, he is directly descended from Genghis Khan, who you will almost certainly have heard of. So there was a lot of expected of Babur, but he's from quite a small area in what is now modern day Pakistan or Afghanistan. And he's originally has a kind of Mongolian or what is known as a Chagatai descent. So he has a various different ethnic origins. And he, in his teenage years, begins to expand from his local region and he has some success. in the northwest, but also a number of defeats by the time he's 15 or 16 years old. However, he decides to set his sight on northern India, and he manages to gain a series of notable victories against important leaders. First, he defeats Ibrahim Lodi at the Battle of Panipat in 1526. And that's a really interesting battle that I would seriously advise going and looking at. And then after that impressive victory, he goes on to defeat a popular Hindi ruler called Rana Saga in 1527. And after these two defeats, he gains a lot of territory. And it's in that time period, 1526, 1527 approximately, that he declares himself the first Mughal emperor. So he is defining himself as ruling over multiple people over different Mahayana padas or areas of land. And I don't know if you can see it properly, but on the right hand image, there is a dotted red line in the north of India, and that is what he rules over. But that territory expands greatly over the next few decades. Now, I'm not going to talk about Babur's son, who is much less effective ruler and actually loses ground, but it is under Babur's grandson, Akbar, that you truly begin to see a defined Mughal culture and a lot of what you might call or recognize as Indian art and literature, although there is no stereotypical art. The most famous art from India stems from the era of Akbar. And he inherits a slightly divided empire at 13 years old. And Akbar's rule is has a very interesting duality to it. Because first of all, and what he is primarily known as, is an aggressive conqueror in the style of his forebear, Genghis Khan. So he gets a lot of support and important technological advantages from the Ottoman Turks. And with those, he defeats huge areas of land and conquers large areas of not just northern India now, but southern India as well. And he's an incredibly effective tactician and can be brutal when he needs to be. However, there is another part of his personality that seems the polar opposite of this brutal conqueror. He's actually an incredibly enlightened and liberal individual. And he recognizes that to effectively rule over a religiously divided country as a minority Muslim ruler ruling over a majority of Sikhs and Hindus, he allows religious toleration, he encourages it, and he actually marries a Hindu woman. He marries multiple women over his rule, but one of the most important is this marriage to Mariam uz Zamani. And it is this marriage of a political marriage, but also a marriage of cultures. And he actually becomes slightly disillusioned with Islam. And he really admires Hindu and Sikh cultures and encourages those religions and the arts of those religions. So he will defeat a country, but then allow the people of that nation to practice their religion. And in fact, he is a massive patron of the arts, literatures, and architectures of different religions. And you see a combination of those arts. And under his time period, there is a cultural and economic revolution in India. And this is what we think of that defines the Mughal Empire. So, in his court, at the heart of his court is something known as the Nine Jewels. And they are individuals from different parts of India, different religions, different ethnicities, who all come together and contribute to the culture of the Mughal Empire. There are historians who write biographies and autobiographies. There are philosophers, poets, mystics, and accountants, and they all meet and talk and exchange ideas and publish works and distribute those works throughout India and belong. And there is a search for knowledge that defines the Mughal Empire under Akbar. Now, there's a list of his nine of his most famous advisors, and before the seminar, would you like you to pick one or two of them and just get some knowledge about who they were and what they did? Because these nine jewels really give us an insight into what was valued by the Mughal emperor and in Indian society. So pick one or two of those because I'm going to go through all nine of them in the seminar in more detail. But it's not just literature that has a cultural revolution in this time period. Art drastically changes. And there's an article I listed on the module handout that you should really read if you want to know more about this. But generally speaking, through Persian commentators, they reveal that Mughal art is colourful and celebratory. And Akbar is a proponent of creating catalogues of um, animals and insects, and you get these enormous, colourful encyclopedias that show a variety of different animals from different countries, and there's a move away from what was known as Indian miniatures, which were very small, delicate pictures, to much grander, colourful canvases, and specifically side profile images of individuals. A lot of the pictures you will see from this time period, there is a side profile, and apparently the likenesses of the individuals are very accurate. But you also get different um, art styles incorporated. So you have a Persian influence. And in the top right, you can see cherubs. So you see Western European art influencing Mughal art in this time period as well. So the look of art and literature changes drastically under Akbar. But also the physical landscape of India changes through its architecture. And what you might think of when you think of Indian architecture really stems from the Mughal Empire, as in white marble used for these elaborate palaces, domed tops to buildings, and towers on the corners of walls. And this is a marriage of Islam, Hindu, Sikh, styles. You start to get enormous gardens, water gardens with beautiful botany that surround these enormous palaces. And as well, the love for different animals are seen in intricate sculptures of elephants and monkeys and cows that you see. There's also enormous amount of fortresses that are built in this time period to ensure that there is a semblance of stability throughout the diverse kingdoms of India. And Akbar travels around India a lot to ensure that the country is being kept stable. Now I'm going to move on to Akbar's son, Akbar and Mariam's son, Jahangir. Now, Jahangir inherits an incredibly wealthy empire. At this point, 25% of the global economy is based in India. Akbar has solidified India as probably the global power at the time. And Jahangir revels in the wealth and decadence of the Mughal Empire. He is an infamous opium and alcohol addict, and we have wonderful material culture to look at. Under his reign, hookah becomes an incredibly popular pastimes, so smoking, hookah pipes, and opium. And you get these wonderful bone um, cups from his kingdom, and gold becomes used increasingly often in art and architecture. However, Jahangir is not his father or his great grandfather, and he's incredibly unpopular in large parts of India. And to try and maintain order, he has a brutal, retributive judicial system. He actually wages a war against his son for dominance in India. So he is much less unifying. And it is in this lack of unity that Britain gains a foothold. And I'm going to talk about that more in the next lecture. But it is under Jahangir, who is a much weaker leader than his father, that Britain gains an important inroad into Indian culture. And that's because he is too busy reveling in wealth and luxurious pastimes. So, the most important points of this lecture I put on this conclusion slide. I'm not going to read them for you, but you can pause it and make notes of that. So if you take anything away from this lecture about the rise of the Mughals, these are the main points. Now, for next week's seminar, I want you to think about the following questions. I will be thinking and talking about other stuff, but these are the most important themes we'll be talking about. So I want you to think about, why were the Silk Roads so important in helping to shape the Indian subcontinent's political and social structures? So I've touched upon that a little bit, but I want you to think of some other factors. How did it shape Indian culture? Secondly, I want you to think about, what was the role of religion in the rise of the Mughal Empire. Religion is one of the most important points that we'll be talking about over the next 2 weeks. So I really need you to think about the religious divisions and unities, and what was the role of religion. I then want you to think about, who were Akbar's 9 jewels. So I've touched upon this already. Go away, look at the names, and think about why they were so important and what their importance says about the Mughals' cultural renaissance. And what does the role of the 9 jewels in the court of Akbar reveal about Mughal culture? I then finally want you to think about, why was Jahangir so ineffective compared with his father and great grandfather? And I don't just mean his opium addiction. How did he rule? And I've put an important article that explores that, which is The Emperor Jahangir and the Pursuit of Pleasure, which is available on JSTOR through the Journal of Royal Asiatic Society journal. So read that, think about those questions, and we'll explore the rise of the Mughal Empire further in the seminar next week.